Welcome, dear listeners, to Lighting the Dark, the show that bravely ventures into the shadowy corners of the Dark Ages. I am your fictional humble priest, Father Ramble, ever eager to illuminate the forgotten stories of faith, resilience, and, as we'll see in today's story, the occasional bit of historical unpleasantness. Today we're casting our light upon a truly pivotal and rather grim event, the Viking raid on the Monastery of Lindisfarne. A moment that, as the insightful scholar Lars Brownworth noted, marked a terrifying chapter for the early English church and indeed the entire British Isles. To understand why Lindisfarne is such a tempting target, we have to begin by appreciating the burgeoning wealth of English monasteries at this time. Over the preceding century, these monasteries had accumulated significant riches, a fact that it is believed had become known to the Viking homelands. The monasteries were no longer merely humble abodes of prayer. They functioned as important economic hubs for their societies as well. Monasteries served as natural locations for the acquisition of valuable goods brought from afar, things such as wine for communion, textiles for religious garments, and precious metals for sacred vessels and reliquaries. Think of them as the early medieval equivalent of some well-stocked treasuries just waiting for some hungry wolves to pounce. Furthermore, these monasteries served as secure storage facilities. It's recorded that powerful individuals in England frequently entrusted major churches with their valuable possessions for safekeeping. These monasteries were essentially acting as early forms of banks. I mean, if you can't trust the church with your money, who can you trust? Well, except these guys, of course. Consequently, Lindisfarne, it appears, was particularly affluent. It had received generous endowments from the Northumbrian royalty and housed a significant collection of holy relics, including the revered remains of St. Cuthbert, an English monk, and St. Columba, an influential Irish missionary. This was a veritable treasure trove, both spiritually and materially. Unlike Brother Pottlduck's attempts to collect holy dust bunnies, which thankfully didn't really amount to much. Lindisfarne. Even the name whispers of a sacred place, doesn't it? Picture Lindisfarne with me, a tranquil island, a beacon of spiritual and intellectual light. But this light, unfortunately, also proved rather attractive to some unsavory characters lurking just beyond the horizon. Now, as this particular storm broke out, it began with an unfortunate encounter down the coast on the Isle of Portland. A local official, a Reeve named Beaduheard, unwisely assumed the Vikings were merchants and rode down to the beach intending to direct them to a suitable manner for conducting trade. Sadly, before he could even speak, he and his men were instantly killed by a volley of Viking arrows. One hopes poor Beaduheard had more astute sense of danger than our dear brother Pottlduck, who once tried to barter for relics with a handful of shiny pebbles. That didn't go well, unless a good day for you was an atomic wedgie and two black eyes. And so in 793 AD, the unthinkable happened. The pagan Norsemen, as they were known, descended upon Lindisfarne with a savagery that shocked the Christian world. Eyewitness accounts and later chronicles describe a scene of utter brutality. No one was spared. Monks who attempted to defend their sacred place were brutally cut down or dragged to the shore and drowned. Holy containers holding relics were torn apart, their precious contents discarded. Rich tapestries adorning the chapel walls were ripped down, altars smashed, and the bodies of the slain lay scattered everywhere like refuse in the streets. A truly horrific scene, a stark violation of the sacred space and the lives within it. The impact of this brutal attack was profound. Contemporary interpretations often attribute this disaster to a decline in the moral standards of the English church. people grappled with the questions of what sins that they committed that could have invited such divine retribution. Perhaps they'd been too fond of illuminated letters with slightly risque marginalia. One can only speculate. However, this period of introspection did little to halt the unfolding events. In the years that followed, the monasteries of Jarrow and Skye were attacked, and in 795, the venerable monastery of Iona suffered the same fate. The darkness of the Vikings was spreading, much like the persistent dampness in Brother Puddleduck's chambers. Seriously, dude, quit using the corner of your room as your own personal outhouse. In response to the growing threat, the English did attempt to bolster their defenses. It's recorded that in 792 AD, the monasteries of Kent were actually forced by local magistrates to contribute to the construction of coastal defenses against the incursions of the quote-unquote pagan seamen. It seems they were finally taking the threat seriously, though too little too late for our poor friends at Lindisfarne. Unfortunately, these initial defensive measures proved woefully inadequate against the nature of the Viking attacks. These were not simply opportunistic pirates. The Vikings were highly skilled navigators and formidable warriors with a keen understanding of their target's weaknesses. They likely wouldn't have been fooled by Brother Puddleduck's attempts at camouflage, which usually involve draping himself in seaweed. The scent tends to give him away before you can find him. So the raid on Lindisfarne, as so vividly described in historical accounts, was not just a tragic incident. Lindisfarne was a turning point. It exposed the vulnerability of the wealthy yet relatively undefended monastic centers of England and ushered in an era of sustained Viking incursions. The initial shock and horror eventually gave way to a period of adaptation and resistance. But the shadow of the longships loomed large over the English landscape for centuries to come. The insights from our historical sources truly illuminate the significance of this dark chapter in history. It wasn't just about gold and silver. This was a clash of cultures. It was about the vulnerability of faith and the dawn of a new and sometimes terrifying era. Yet even though the age of the Vikings would bring much darkness and upheaval to the British Isles, it's also important to remember that the story doesn't end with longships and lamentations. Over time, the relentless tide of Viking expansion would eventually turn. Many of these fierce warriors and their descendants would be defeated and remarkably converted to the Christian faith. Think of names like Guthrum, one of the major Viking leaders who, after his defeat by Alfred the Great, embraced Christianity and was baptized with the English king as his sponsor. So even from the depths of this early darkness, the light of faith would eventually find a way to illuminate even the hearts of those who once brought such terror. Join me next time on Lighting the Dark as we continue navigating the complexities of the Dark Ages. Perhaps maybe we'll explore the surprisingly complex world of medieval diplomacy, hopefully with more lasting peace than what Puddleduck achieves in his squabbles with the monastery geese. If you've enjoyed our journey today, do consider clicking that like button. It helps our little lanterns shine a bit brighter. And if you don't want to miss any future explorations into the fascinating history of the church during the Dark Ages, please be sure to subscribe. And hey, we're always eager to hear what sparks your historical curiosity, so please do leave a comment below. Let us know what other figures, events, or theological debates from the Dark Ages you'd like us to cover. Your suggestions help us decide where to point our next beam of light. Until then, may your own path be well lit by the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. Farewell.